Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be doing lesson 4 in our online learning. You should already have lessons 1, 2, and 3 done, which was basically just the Cold War test, some of the workbook pages that we worked on. So that part should be done. So we'll be starting on civil rights. I'm going to go to Google Classroom really quick so you can kind of see what we're at. So here's lesson 4, civil rights. We'll be starting a civil rights unit. Complete the following task in order. So this is your task, is to kind of go through this in order as I have it. So obviously, if you're watching this, we're going to be doing the PowerPoint notes first, looking at slides 1 through 9 on this video lecture. I also have up here for B, watch video on YouTube right here. It's a pretty good video. You'll watch minutes 29 through 30. It's about 9 minutes. So pretty easy peasy as far as that goes. Don't watch the whole thing unless you want to, but just fly over to minute 21 through 30. And then I have a web quest for C that I have, which is right here. So it's web quest. And then here are all the websites that I have that you'll need in order to fill it out. And then D is the exit ticket. Now, really quick, let me know on this. I'm not sure kind of what you guys see and what your capabilities are, but I have an assignment for the web quest. Do not do it on this because you can't turn in the assignment on this. So basically, just for this, kind of ignore C. You will need the website, so you will need this. You'll need this page in order to access the links. So what I will need you to do, I'm going to cancel this out. You'll see there should be classwork. Let's see here, civil rights. All right, so there should be here under a classwork. You guys can go to that tab. You'll just click on civil rights web quest, and then here's the instructions. You'll click on the Google Doc, like so, for your assignment, and you will answer the questions on this. I guess technically you can just click on the links here. You don't need to go back to the Google Classroom page, but once you are done with it, there should be a turn-in button. You'll fill it all out over some of the big civil rights events, and then you'll submit it on the page for your assignment, for your classwork. So hopefully that made that clear on that. So for the web quest, you're going to do it in the classwork. Don't do it actually on the streaming on this because there's nowhere to turn it in on the announcement page. You need to go to the classwork, and that's where you'll submit all of your stuff. All right, so hopefully that's clear. If you have a hard time getting onto the document, let me know, and I'll open up access for you. But you should be good to go. But again, just make sure that you email me if you're having any issues with that. All right, so hopefully that's clear. All right, so I wanted to go through that. You will also have lesson 5 as well that you'll do, that I'll open up to you. You kind of go through that. You're going to read a Malcolm X versus MLK. You'll compare and you'll contrast. You'll do the assignment, and you'll do civil rights test quiz, what you want to call it. But I also will give you a video lecture that I'll post up here too for you to listen to. And the same thing goes for the Malcolm X assignment. I have that posted in the classwork. So don't do it on this. Don't click on this. Do not do that on this page right here because you can't submit it. So you'll have to, same thing. You'll have to go to your classwork. You'll have to click on lesson 5, civil rights, and then I have the reading and I have the doc. This is what you'll click on. Once you finish it, you'll answer the questions as I have. I'll show you. Okay, you'll answer the questions if you're reading the document. Some critical thinking questions, and then once you click it, once you answer all the questions, you'll submit it on this. But again, don't do it on the announcement page. Go to the classwork, and then you'll turn it in when you finish. You should be able to see it on your page. All right. So without further ado, go back to this. All right, so here are your notes for lesson 4. Lesson 4. All right, so civil rights unit. We're going to go through some civil rights leaders, some things that you guys need to kind of guide you through lesson 4. All right, so what is civil rights? What does that mean? It means it's basic rights that everyone is entitled to, especially equal opportunity and treatment for minorities. So no secret, if you've watched any civil rights movies like 42 with Jackie Robinson, going back to the slavery times, for a long time, African Americans were treated unfairly in our country. They weren't given job opportunities, housing opportunities, economic opportunities, you name it. So this movement that has really always been around, but really started to pick up steam after World War II, where they've become much more organized in their protests to fight for equal opportunities in all aspects of society. Again, as we talked about, even before you've learned about this, there was systematic racism, meaning that the government, you have those that were in government were mostly white. And even down in the South, you had members of the KKK that were police officers, that were mayors, that were judges, that were passing laws and enforcing laws and interpreting laws that were not giving African Americans a fair chance. So these movements became more widespread. So just some other things. A lot of it was, especially up in the North, was based upon stereotypes. So what's a stereotype? It's thoughts based upon putting people into groups. So we all have stereotypes. There's teenagers have stereotypes as being lazy, caring about themselves. If you think of like the millennial generation, kind of the same thing. Parents have stereotypes as being lame and boring and yada, yada, yada. Teachers have stereotypes, elderly, jocks, blondes, you name it, they're stereotypes. So it's a preconceived notion without really getting the chance to really get to know them. That's what a stereotype is. So you have a prejudice. A prejudice is a feeling. It's a form, an opinion, a judgment based upon your stereotypes. So it's how you think, more or less. Now, where that turns into action, it would be discrimination. So you're taking your stereotypes about them, and then you have an action that is providing somebody unequal treatment. So maybe not selling somebody something because of their color of their skin. Maybe you're not treating somebody fairly based upon the color of their skin or religion, whatever the case might be. So that's when it turns into actions. All right. So how were African Americans? How were they discriminated against? Basically post-slavery, they were physically attacked. You had vigilante groups, white citizens all over the country taking the law into their own hands and physically beating, murdering African Americans. You have members of the KKK that will form and do that as well. You had lynchings where they would physically attack, beat up, and hang an African American in plain sight for the whole community to watch. So they use physical violence to promote their hate and their ideologies. All right, next major thing is voting rights. There were laws, especially down south, to take voting rights away from African Americans. So there were three ways on how African Americans were kept from voting. One is that a lot of southern states passed something called a poll tax. Poll tax was you had to pay in order to vote. Well, if you were an African American and you didn't have a very good job or were making a whole lot of money, this would often kind of deter African Americans from voting because they had to pay for it and they didn't have the money to do so. Two, this is the most common that southern states did. They had their citizens take literacy tests, meaning that they had to prove that they could read or write before they take a test. I'm sorry, before they vote. So now here's the thing. Southern states, they gave everybody these tests, but they weren't equal. They would give white citizens a very easy test they had to take. I mean, basically anybody can really pass it. They would give the hard tests to African Americans, stuff that nobody would even know, at least the common person. So they made these tests very unfair. If you didn't pass a test, you couldn't vote. So this really will also affect African Americans as well. And then there was something called the grandfather clause, where basically if your grandfather couldn't vote, then you can't vote. Well, if your grandfather was a former slave who couldn't vote, then obviously you couldn't vote either. So these were the three measures that states would take to basically not allow African Americans the right to vote. As I said before, there were They were discriminated against when receiving jobs and housing. There were certain sections of cities that wouldn't sell homes to African Americans to keep them segregated. They, especially white communities in the suburbs or nicer areas, they wouldn't sell their homes to African American families. You have something called Jim Crows, and Jim Crow laws, very important. Jim Crow laws were laws that were passed in the South that would legally segregate the races. So again, schools, and so there are black schools and white schools. That's segregation. You're separating. Buses. Whites would sit in the front part of the bus. African Americans would sit in the back of the bus. Restaurants were segregated. Whites sectioned only. In some restaurants, African Americans weren't allowed to sit in the restaurant. Bathrooms were segregated. We had white and you had black bathrooms. Military was also segregated. These laws were prevalent all throughout the South. If you've seen 42, the documentary or the movie on Jackie Robinson, you would see that as well, where he, in some cases, couldn't play baseball with white players. So here's kind of, now there's two major court cases, two major ones that you need to know. One is Plessy versus Ferguson. This is in 1896. What allowed segregation to occur? Well, it was this court case. The Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that states were allowed to separate based upon race as long as the facilities were equal. Now that's BS. The black schools were nowhere near equal as the white schools. What black facilities weren't nowhere near the same facilities as white facilities. But that's what southern states would do to legalize their separation of the races. So it was all because of Plessy versus Ferguson. It was because Supreme Court said, our federal government said, you can separate based upon race. And then finally, in 1954, again, 50-something years later, 52 years later, the court case Brown versus Board came about. And this young girl, Linda Brown, and her father, Linda Brown was an African-American girl. She had to go to an underperforming African-American school that was far away from her house. When there was a white school right across the block, that was a better performing school. So they tried to enroll Linda Brown in this white school, and her access was denied based upon race. Now, the NAACP, which we'll talk about more in a minute, they encouraged her and her father to enroll in the white school that was closer to her house. So the NAACP, as we'll talk about in a minute, was as a group or as an organization that will really push people to break these laws to bring about Supreme Court cases. Now, the reason why this is important because the Supreme Court will eventually rule that segregation in education was unconstitutional. So they will outlaw segregation in schools. And one of the things that they'll point to is the fact that segregation, especially with young kids, can cause, you can actually prove this, can hurt their psyche, can hurt their mind, their feelings about how they view themselves. So that was a really smart argument in terms of the NAACP and Linda Brown's lawyers, is that you can actually quantify that, you can actually prove it. So this court case will start the process for outlawing segregation. Okay, Brown versus Board, so you need to know that. So as I said, the NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This was an organization that provided legal services and passed laws to help minorities. Very influential group. They're still around today, very powerful, lots of money, lots of powerful people. And a lot of the civil rights leaders are going to get their start by working in the NAACP, as you'll see in a minute with Rosa Parks. They will openly challenge a lot of these state laws and will make a profound effect in making a lot of these changes. All right, so a couple different things. The Little Rock Nine. I'm going to go through quick because we're running out of time with the 14 minutes. But Little Rock Nine had to desegregate who they were. They were 9 African-American students that were the first to desegregate in the high schools. And there was a problem with state and federal government. This federal government, Brown versus Board, passed, they had to outlaw segregation. Well, the states weren't following it. Governor Faubus of Arkansas basically stopped these students from coming in. So President Eisenhower had to send federal troops in to escort them in and force them into these schools. Here's a picture. You see this, this lady behind her screaming and yelling at these students. And then again, as you'll see in the WebQuest, the NAACP they chose these students for a reason that you'll read about. Rosa Parks, again, she was a secretary for the NAACP, and she openly broke the law about the buses. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to kind of fly through this, but you'll see it on your WebQuest. You'll learn more about her role in that. And then ultimately, the Montgomery bus boycott's going to be significant because it's going to outlaw. It'll be a big victory for civil rights movements. It will show that that peaceful movements do work. So